going to be talking about the life of Joseph and just how influential of a person he was, not just in the history of Israel, but really in the history of the world. Today on the Deep Dives, episode 38.
All right.
Episode 38. 38 special.
Another Thursday.
Yeah.
Thursday's a good day. We're doing our podcast today. Obviously, we had the beginning of the new term at church last night, where we are talking about returning to praise.
Yeah, we're doing a whole series. The church is on returning to praise. Is a series that was written, I think, primarily by Jacob Giles.
I think so.
Yeah. And so, we started that last night.
So I had to leave class after I did half hour of gun last night. How was the video? Did y'all watch the video and use it as an intro?
Well, I'm on camera, and it's a church thing, so it was great.
It was great.
No, it was. Yeah.
Good. I know it was. Production's always really good,
Yep.
and the content is obviously really good. Good, very good. And how did the class respond? Seem like they were interested?
Yeah. Well, we went from the video, and with the video we're given a leadership manual and all that kind of stuff,
right,
of different questions and discussion topics to go over, and so we were after the video we were in Romans 12 about yielding your body or giving your bodies as a living sacrifice.
Okay.
And so we talked about what that meant, and it really tied into our series that we did before that on why it's returning to praise. Why? Because that implies that we somehow lost the ability to be in God's presence.
Right.
And so we sort of tied all those things together.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good.
It was fun.
I'm looking forward to being there for the whole class. I am without a car this week.
Right.
And so I ride my bicycle to and from work. So and last night, our class starts at 6:30. Sunset was at 7:30. So I left right after I was done.
Yeah, I know. It's funny because I wasn't expecting that.
I know it.
I was in there, getting my laptop and presentation ready to stick on the TV, and you're like, all right, so Josh, you can go ahead and come up and start your thing. I'm leaving.
Yeah, ready to go. I don't have lights on my bike, so I had to.
Yeah.
I was rushing. I got home right before it.
Right.
It was probably a little bit too dangerous at the very end, but I was already in the neighborhood, so I didn't get a chance to take part in that. So hopefully next week, my car. Hopefully next week it'll be fixed, but my car, I don't know what strange things happen. Chris, our engineer, his car, by the way, same exact car. What year is yours, Chris? 09. Okay. I'm 05.
Okay.
Looks very, very similar.
Yeah.
Very similar. His car last week we found out about it. You and I found out about it last week, overheating. And man, daggone, Chris, can we do something for you? No, I just put water in it, and it gets me, 15 minutes, and I put more water in it. Man, that stinks.
You couldn't do anything about it, so you just decided to be with him in that.
I was suffering with with him. Okay, Chris, we'll see you. All right, I'm gonna get in my car. I'm gonna see you later. But he's managing, and I was thinking about how we could get Chris a car somehow, and I was really close. Man, I was close.
Yeah,
I was so close, but no cigar. So 2 days later, I'm driving from my house, and my car overheats. Put water in it. 15 minutes later, it overheated again. I had to put water. So what in the world is going on here? My car wasn't even parked next to Chris's car, but it starts acting like Chris's car now. So I took it in to Sam's Automotive, and they were looking at it. I'm hoping it's just a hose. I don't know, but I can't do anything about it. So ride my bike to and from, and I don't know if y'all noticed or not, but it's a tad on the warm side outside here in Florida in August.
Yeah.
It's just a little bit on the way home. Yesterday or maybe the day before, I rode by a bank and it was 98 degrees. blanket. It's warm. It's warm. But anyway, I love riding my bike, so I look at it as a positive. But you have to adjust, and this is what I wanted to talk about before we get going. Is you adjust to things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Chris was adjusting to his situation. I'm adjusting to mine. I'm glad I have a bike. I'm glad I know how to ride it. I'm glad I've ridden on the road before. I have the skills to stay safe. Although this riding is quite different. It's really you've got to look 365 degrees everywhere you go, and it's just you've got to act like you're invisible. That's one thing my father taught me, to ride a motorcycle like you are invisible. Don't assume anything. Don't assume people see you. Don't assume anything, and that's the way I ride my bicycle also.
My life seems to be a perpetual practice in having to adapt to unexpected things.
That's one of the secrets to life, is adapting.
I think so. Like, the ability to adapt is one of those. It's not really discussed a lot, as a talent or a skill or whatever. But man, every now and then you encounter someone who, like, something goes wrong and they freeze. They don't know what to do, and I'm like, you can't do that. Yeah. Because if you don't do that, then whatever decision that you're facing, it's going to be made for you eventually, and you have no control over that.
Right.
And that always kind of bothered me. Like, you have to either attack the problem or it's going to attack you.
I think I've had several conversations with people that I know and love about being a black and white personality. It's right or it's wrong. It's this or it's that. And I'm not saying that that's not true. But I'm saying being ideal and living in the real world are not the same thing.
Right.
So being a black and white person, yes, there's sin and there's not sin. But Jesus had to die on the cross, in my opinion, because we don't live in a black and white world.
Right.
So whenever you live in that black and white world, you have to, you in your head is a black and white. You want to be a black and white world, but it's not. So you have to continually adjust to that. And and you can't have the same things in your life whenever you're adjusting to things. For example, I'm sitting here soaking wet. I'd like to have time. I like coming in here.
Right.
Smelling good.
We enjoy that too.
Yeah, y'all enjoy it too. Have taken a shower. I like all that stuff. But hey, I can't. It's not possible.
Yeah.
It's not or we don't do the podcast. Well, it's a priority in our life to make this podcast work.
Right.
So, got up this morning, rode in here. I'm dry, a little bit dry now. By the way, I know science. I'm a big science guy. Sweat, it doesn't stink. It's dried sweat that stinks. So, you're welcome, both of you, Chris and Josh. You're welcome.
Well, I remember
in about 10 minutes. You're gonna love it.
Right. Well, I remember when my daughter was very little, and like Saturdays were always, let's go do something fun, and then we'd go do something fun, and then immediately after that, well, let's go do this now, and let's go do this now, and there's only so much you can fit into a day, whether it's with respect to time or with respect to money.
Yeah.
And so there are a lot of times we had to cut it off and be like, no, we got to go home now, something like that. And that would be a disappointment to her. And it was kind of like an ongoing lesson. It's like, it's often true that you can have some of the things that you want, but it's very rare that you ever get to have everything that you want all the time.
Right.
And it's interesting when those unexpected things happen in life, that when they pop up, we're always faced with the challenge of readjusting the priority list. For example, what you just talked about, you like to come in here having just had a shower or whatever, but in the list of priorities, that might get bumped down in order to make something that's more important happen, or maybe not bumped down, but just postponed a little bit or something like that.
You adjust,
you adjust, and not having the ability to adjust really cripples.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the black and white world. We talked about this a couple times in our Bible study on Gun Club. The picture of the black and white world, where there's a hard line drawn between what's right and what's wrong, oftentimes gets blurred because of circumstances or whatever. I'm not talking about like compromising truth or morality or whatever, but what we often perceive or the Sunday school the Sunday school view of the world tends to fade after a while. A really good example of that, which we'll kind of get into here a little bit later, but several we're often taught how it's wrong to lie, it's wrong to speak untruths or whatever, but there are several times in the Bible where exactly that did happen, and the people were blessed as a result of it. Like the midwives in Egypt, the Pharaoh said, kill all the men children that are born from the children of Israel,
right.
And the midwives, they were helping Israel conceal those kids, and they were lying to the Egyptians about it, and they were blessed as a result of it.
How about that?
There are several times, and we've even talked about this in our discussion of firearms, things like that. There's like the act of concealment,
right,
is a deceptive act,
right? Yeah, is that a lie?
By its nature, right? But is that wrong? Or like a law enforcement officer who goes undercover, he is actively lying throughout that whole process. Is he wrong in that?
Yes,
point. Right. And so that's why not just the ability to adapt is coupled, I think, with the ability to discern, because the ability to discern gives us the ability to navigate those gray areas in accordance with Scripture. The ability to adapt gives us the power to adjust our path as we're dealing with unexpected things that pop up in our lives.
That's a great point. It's a great point. The point of view, I was, whenever you're on a bicycle for any length of time, I like to use it. If I'm in the woods or if I'm out on a country road, I can use it as a meditation time and start going over things in my head. Even if I don't try, that's just the way it works. And it really is a time of contemplation and resolution many times. And one of the trips in the last 2 or 3 days I've taken, I was thinking about points of view and how we see people, because usually I'm in a car. Usually we're in a car. We're driving back and forth, and we see people that may not have a home, or they're walking, or they're riding a bicycle, and they have what appears to be everything they own behind them on a trailer or something like that. Well, I get to see those people more intimately now that I'm riding a bike.
Yeah.
And many times you go into a corner store, get gas or whatever. If you go inside and pay, you might be in line with somebody who doesn't smell all that good because whatever. Well, after you live in a world that's so blessed, like many of us do, like I do, whenever I have indoor running water. Hey, guess what, Josh? There's 2 places in my house I can take a shower. I can make that decision. I've got 2 places in my house I can take a shower.
Well, if you have a hose out back, you have 3.
And 3, right? That's 3. That's better than some people have.
Right.
My point is, not everybody's priority is the same.
Yeah.
A person's priority that you're standing behind that maybe that's really dirty or doesn't smell that good. Hey man, their priority was staying alive last night, sleeping somewhere where if it rained they wouldn't get wet, that kind of a thing. I need to be reminded of that more, and I think that's what he's using right now for me to remember is other people's point of view. I was walking out of Walmart some time ago with a friend of mine. And this person, I'm pretty sure all Walmarts are pretty close to being the same thing. You're walking outside, just to the right, in the corridor, I guess, where all the vending machines are. just to the right are benches, and people are sitting on those benches many times. And this person said, "Why are people sitting on those benches?" This person had no concept of not having a vehicle. And I simply told her, so they're either waiting for a ride, they're waiting for a cab, they're waiting for Uber or whatever. But she said, "Oh, okay." But having not, it was so obvious to me.
Yeah. It wasn't in her own experience.
It wasn't at all
Right.
in this person's experience. And I'm not criticizing. I just soak that in.
Yeah.
And just try to learn from it and try to be thankful for it. I was thankful that this person had no clue, because that means this person has never had to do that before.
Right.
Can you get that in your head, Pops?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The person, like, why don't they get it? In other words, why don't they just get in their car and go? Are they resting or whatever? I'm like, man, what a blessed life you have, and I'm so thankful for you that you've had that. I'm not being critical. I really wasn't. He allowed me to soak that in and go, that's how good you have it, dude.
Right.
That's how good you have it. And hey, I told y'all before we started, I love riding my bike. This isn't really a chore to me. This is more of a chore for y'all to have to put up with the smell that's about to happen. It's not. I mean, you know, I don't know how long I'll continue. If I get my car back, will I ride my bike to work that day? I don't know. But I'm enjoying it right now.
Right.
It's not a chore. It's not.
Yeah.
So,
Well,
anyway.
okay. So speaking of adaptation, you know, the silly question we have for each other every week will have to do with that. So
Okay.
imagine yourself, you know, probably, you know, you're on your way to Wednesday night class. You get a text from Josh, says, "Hey, something came up. I'm not going to be able to be there tonight." You have like all of 5 minutes to figure out how you're going to fit that additional 30 minutes in. So if you had to give a 30-minute presentation on something with no preparation, what topic could you easily cover?
It would be self-defense, environmental awareness, something to do with environmental safety, firearms, photography, or bike racing.
Okay.
And I could do some Bible study. Some probably Acts, although I could wing it if I had notes.
Right.
Right. If I had my old Bible that I could look through, I could do that.
Okay.
Especially if I had a what is it called? A template of a Bible study. I could look at the Bible, and I could do that.
Right. Someone's moving tables outside.
Yeah, they're actually pulling out the old baptistry.
Oh.
That's close to here.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
We may need to reschedule this next week.
Right, so, I hopefully you can't hear that in the background, but we can. But yeah, without notes, I could do photography or mountain bike racing or other kind of racing like that. But with notes, I can do a Bible study for sure.
Cool.
What about you?
There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Probably the funniest one. I was in Lowe's a couple months ago, and I was on the aisle that has all the nuts and bolts and nails and screws and all that kind of stuff, and
All the loose ones in bins?
yeah, all the loose ones in bins, and then all the boxes of them in the back.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Or behind me on the other shelf. Yeah, Tim between me and Taylor. Right? Well, there was this other guy who was on the aisle, and he was looking at the nails, and he got my attention. He's like, "Hey, do you know much about nails? Like which ones I would need for a particular project?" And in my mind, it was just funny to me because I'm like, this dude picked the wrong guy, because when you start asking a guy who does structural engineering about nails, I'm like, I can sit here and talk to you for 2 hours.
But that's not what he was asking.
That's not what he wants at all. But
he didn't want to know the makeup of each nail,
right?
What you would see if you dissected each. He didn't need to know that,
right? But like for a split second there, I got really excited, and similarly. Last night I was, about to sit down and have supper. This is after church, And I got an email from a guy that I do a lot of work with. He's actually become a good friend of mine over the years, and he had a question about bolts and like the grade of steel that's used in bolts, and why is it that when he goes to a supplier to get threaded rod, it's always this grade, and sometimes in engineering plans call for another grade, and what does that all mean? And it was so much fun answering that email, because I'm just such a huge nerd about these weird engineering topics. And I even said at the end of this long email explanation of like the history of these specifications and what the material
Bolts were
strengths are.
invented in 1832. First one was three-sided. Okay.
I even told him like, so thank you for asking that, because that was a really fun email to write.
I didn't even use ChatGPT. That's all off the top of my head.
Yep. So, I mean, yeah, I could do Bible studies. I could do, stuff about engineering, just nerd stuff in general.
Right.
If you want a dissertation on the compare and contrast between the philosophy of Star Wars and Star Trek, I can do that.
You can do that too. Okay. Good. Well, now, the real answer is what I would probably do is do my, the original question was, what would I do if you canceled last minute? And we typically do I start out and I do half-hour gun, and then you do half-hour God. What I would probably do is just bring up a video of self-defense. What's the name of it again?
Active self-protection.
Active self-protection, and we would watch it and we would discuss it. That has never failed to include everybody in the class.
Right.
Even if somebody doesn't give their 2 cents, you can tell that they're enthralled and they're watching everybody as they talk, and they want to say something, but they maybe don't. That has never failed.
Yep.
So I would probably realistically do that.
So it's the equivalent of when we were kids in school and there was a substitute
That's
teacher.
exactly right.
They would wheel in the TV that was strapped to the metal stand.
Well, in my case, they'd wheel in the projector.
Right.
The AV.
We're going to be watching a video today.
I'll be right. Yes. All right. Cool. Well, Josh, before we get to the meat of the program,
Yeah.
I'm going to tell one story.
Okay.
Just one funny, quick story, because believe it or not, some people like my stories.
I like your stories.
Thank you very much. Some people do, some people don't. I'm not going to say who's who.
Well, I'll say this: it brings a really good balance, because sometimes when I'm doing the deep dive part, where we're really getting into the details of stuff, I'll listen back to it and I'm like, man, my voice is really monotone. I'm just spitting out a lot of facts. I think your stories bring a lot of good balance to that.
Okay, good.
So that we have, it's kind of like what we do in Gun Club. You know?
It is. It really is. It's,
I don't know if you're Laurel and I'm Hardy, or the other way around, or if,
I know. I know which one I am, and that's okay with me.
or maybe Pinky and the Brain. I don't know if you ever watched those.
I have not, but I tell you, another secret to life is know who you are, and I know who I am. I know who I am in this partnership.
Same, I'm the nerd, whatever. That's cool. I'm okay with that.
So I'm riding my bike to work today, and it's really a beautiful day. It was 80 degrees, and listen, by the numbers, 80 and 90, only 10. That's a huge difference,
right?
By the way, a huge difference, especially when it's not as humid as it usually is in the morning. It's not as bad. But the sun's coming up. It's a relatively nice day. People are active. I love getting up early. I don't do it a lot here recently, but when I do, I just love it. And I used to get up before dark and go out and ride, and that was just my life, what I did. But I'm riding, and I got a new mountain bike, and it's new to me. It's about 10, 15 years old, but it's real solid. It's just a beautiful bike. It's real solid. I always love a real quiet bike, and this thing is just dead silent quiet. It's a hardtail, so it doesn't have a shock in the back, but it's got a shock in the front. You can go over the stuff in the front, you don't even feel it. In the back, it's all aluminum, and you're going to feel it. You have to compensate for that. But I'm cruising down the sidewalk, and I wear hearing aids, and I'm able to stream with hearing aids. Now, the beautiful thing about hearing aids in streaming is that you can set something to where you can hear music or podcast, and you can still hear the environment. So it's really like you're listening to music somewhere outside of your ear, right? So I have that setting on, and I'm listening to. If you were to ask this morning what the question, what's guilty pleasure of music, I would say Grateful Dead.
Okay.
That's just the way it is. History does not apologize for that. That's just the way it is.
At least it's not like Taylor Swift.
It's not Taylor Swift, I'll tell you. I would not admit to that.
So you're not denying that that's one of your guilty pleasures. You're just not admitting to it.
Not admitting to that. So I'm listening to Grateful Dead, and I'm singing to the Grateful Dead, which is, that's I gotta rethink that. But I am. I'm singing, and many times I don't know if I'm singing or I'm just talking or whatever. I'm in my own world, but I'm looking around and I'm in this environment. I'm paying attention. There's a car coming up right. There's a car coming left. There's a stop sign. I know everything that's going on in front of me. I thought, but one of the lines is "Make yourself easy." In the song I was listening to, when the morning comes, that's it. Make yourself easy. And right before that line came up, I looked to the left, and I sang the line, and I made eye contact with this woman putting gas in her car. and I sang out loud, "Make yourself easy," and I just made eye contact with her and went, "Well, that probably wasn't good, was it?" So I just cruised on by and acted like it didn't happen. Because I don't think I said anything up to that point or anything after that point. So she's just looking at me. I just looked, in her mind, this jerk just looked at me and said, "Make myself easy." Because I know she doesn't know the Grateful Dead song.
Right? Yeah. Or would have recognized that you were singing one.
She could have been one of the biggest Grateful Dead fans, but that song segmented in that way was not in her mind.
Well, I remember once I was, days like today where I go immediately from appointment to appointment to appointment, I usually have to eat my lunch in a rush,
right.
Usually in the car on the road. And so I was in between site visits. I didn't have a lot of time, and I was starving, so I stopped and got a Jersey Mike's sub. Oh, yeah. And I'm in the car unwrapping it while I'm driving down the road, and I'm just shoving this thing in. It's
big sandwiches too, by the way.
Yeah, big sandwiches. And this is nothing about pleasure. This is only about sustenance.
Right.
And I have a very limited amount of time to do it. So I'm driving down the road, and I'm just shoving this thing in. And I'm at a stoplight, and I'm like, okay, cool, red light. And I just start mowing down on this thing. And this is, in a different vehicle. I didn't have tinted windows. I happened to look over, and there was like this SUV mom in the lane next to me at the red light, just kind of looking on,
staring at you
in horror at what was going on in the car next to her. And I'm just like,
what?
I just didn't know what to do. Like, sorry.
There's nothing you can do.
Yeah.
Nothing you can do.
Just kind of paused momentarily.
How you doing?
Pause momentarily, like a dog eating a bowl of food. Just heard a noise in the woods, and they just went right back at it.
That's funny.
You don't know my life.
That's right.
Don't look at me. I'm hideous.
How you doing? Huh?
Oh goodness.
So, Josh.
Yeah.
Before you get into tell us why you were late last night. We gotta do it, man.
Didn't know this is gonna be part of it.
I know it, but it's such a good story.
So
I just love it. We're about 10 minutes late, which is highly unusual for you.
And so I was on my way from the office to here, and I glanced in the mirror, and like my face was all shaggy. I hadn't shaved in a couple days, and so I have a portable razor in the car.
It's a smart move.
So I grabbed that, and I'm just mowing it down.
Yeah.
And the battery runs out halfway through it, and I'm like, well, I can't show up to class with this half-shaven face. And so I'm going through my mind like, okay, where can I maybe stop and plug this in momentarily so I can at least
Get a 10-minute
get it done. And so I come into the church. I'm like, okay, maybe there's a room that's not being used, or I didn't really want to do it in the bathroom because the only outlets are out in like Gen Pop, and I didn't want to
Gen Pop. That's right. Yeah, right next to people washing their hands.
Yeah, and so I came in the back door of the church, noticed the room that's right outside the studio, and it was empty because it's not used on Wednesday nights. So I ran in here, and there's a secret hallway that goes from here back around to where your office is, and so I ducked into the hallway, and there's a little hidden bathroom there. So I'm like, sweet.
I call that my personal bathroom that people use sometimes.
Nobody knows it's there, and so
including maintenance.
Yeah, probably. And so I just ducked in there real quick and finished the job, and packed everything back in my backpack. And
so funny. I wish you would have came in halfway shaven. Oh my gosh! Because I'm guessing it was either the left half or I had not the top or the bottom. It was
a little bit everywhere.
So just little patches.
Yeah, just look like a bunch of patches.
That's funny. I can imagine what was going through your head. It ran out halfway through. Oh, stink. Speaking of adjusting, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, thanks for sharing that. And contrary to popular belief, some we're going to continue with those stories.
Yeah,
I like them, and we're going to continue on. People have asked for them, so there you go. But Joshy, what are we talking about today?
So today we're actually going to be talking about the life of Joseph. This past Sunday, Pastor Godfrey he started a new series, and the sermon that he titled this past Sunday is called "It Ain't Over Till It's Over," and he told a story about some sports story. I forget what it was about.
You being the sports guy.
Yeah, me being the sports guy. Yeah.
Get the ball in the hoop, the hole there.
Right. Yeah. When we have the when we have the days where we wear our sports jerseys, I have a T-shirt that just says "Yay Sports."
Yay Sports.
Put the thing in the other thing. That's my jersey. Yeah. Because I don't really do sports. However, I have found recently I've developed quite an interest in watching Olympic breakdancing.
Oh,
but
I almost cussed. I looked at Donna. Can I tell it real quick?
Sure.
We were in the kitchen, and I looked to my left where the TV is, and I saw what I thought was a commercial or something. And then I looked to the right and continued my conversation with Donna. I don't know, 10 minutes later, I looked back, and it was still happening. I said, "What's going on?" She said, "Well, breakdancing is an Olympic sport right now." And my attitude and affect changed drastically.
Right.
To the point where she said, "Well, don't get mad about it." I said, "Where are we going in the United States? What is happening?"
Yeah, or the world, because it's a world event.
What's happening in the world with breakdancing?
Yeah. I don't think it's gonna continue being a sport. A lot of people are saying it's not gonna come back next time.
Okay, I'm sorry.
It was a failed one-time experiment. It sounds like.
There's so many other sports it could be. Anyway, okay.
But it has been hilarious. Anyway, but so getting back to the little sports thing, it's always funny. This church is a very sports-heavy
Very
church.
much so.
They love their football, their college football. They love all that kind of stuff. And I'm not really into sports too much, so I don't get half the references that they talk about. But
I'll never forget you watched your first Super Bowl or football game or something, and you were enthralled with the engineering of the cameras.
Yeah, the sky cam that's suspended by 4 cables. Yeah, that.
I think if I remember right, you got out your iPad and you started taking notes.
Right, yeah.
This is a great game.
Exactly. No, so the premise of the sermon was it ain't over till it's over.
Yeah.
And he talked about Joseph, and I wanted to sort of talk about the same thing because Joseph is such an influential person in the Old Testament that oftentimes we don't really gain a respect for just how influential he was, because it wasn't just influential in his family or in the in the history of Israel, but really worldwide. I mean, Joseph was such an instrumental character that he really deserves a lot of attention. And the verse that we read, and that we're going to start out with today, comes from Genesis 37. It says, Jacob, that's Joseph's father, Jacob dwelt in the land wherein his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brethren, and the lad was with the sons of Bilhah and with the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought unto his father their evil report. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and he made him a coat of many colors. And when his brethren saw that their father loved him more than all his brethren, they hated him, and could not speak peaceably unto him. And Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told it his brethren, and they hated him yet more. So
Jealous much?
Jealous much. So there's a lot going on there. So it says that Jacob dwelt where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. Mm-hmm. This is one of those questions that we've talked about a lot in the past. Abraham, he was in the land of Canaan when God promised him that his descendants would inherit the land of Canaan. His son Isaac lived in the land of Canaan, where God reaffirmed that promise to him. Jacob lived in the land of Canaan, where God reaffirmed that promise once again to him. His sons were born there, all this stuff. They lived in the land of Canaan, and yet they spent 430 years outside of the land of Canaan, living in Egypt, only to come back again to Canaan, where God had originally promised them. And the question that we often ask is, if Abraham lived in Canaan, and if Isaac and Jacob lived in Canaan, if the family started in Canaan, why did they have to be taken out of Canaan only to be brought back to Canaan 4 centuries later? And God alludes to this when he talks to Abraham originally about this. He says, "You'll come back after the iniquity of the Amorites is full." The Amorites being synonymous with the term Canaanites, the other people that lived in the land of Canaan. Okay. These nations that drifted farther and farther away from God, and farther into chaos and sin, that by the time Israel comes back, it's all idolatry, in a lot of cases human sacrifice, just every aspect of evil you can imagine. That's what was in Canaan. So the iniquity of the Amorites was full, and so God had taken them out of Canaan because they had a history of being susceptible to the influences of the people around them. Mm-hmm. He took them out of Canaan, protected them in a lot of ways in Egypt for 4 centuries, to bring them back uninfluenced by the iniquity that the Amorites and the Canaanites had developed over that time. Now they had their problems after that, because they kept kept getting involved with that. Right. That's a totally different component of the history of the Old Testament. But here in Genesis 37, it gives sort of the beginning of that transition from Canaan to Egypt, from Egypt to wilderness back to Canaan. And it starts with Joseph. So Joseph, at this time, he was the youngest brother. There eventually was another brother that was younger than him, Benjamin. But at this time, Joseph was the youngest, and he was the one that Jacob loved the most of all of his sons. Mainly because he was the son that came from the wife that Jacob loved the most, and Rachel, I believe. And so, because Joseph was loved the most, he was treated special, as opposed to all his other brothers. And in particular, it says his father loved him more than all his brethren. They hated him and could not speak peaceably unto him. And so Jacob makes Joseph a coat of many colors, which we all know that, right? Mm-hmm. We've all seen the movie Joseph in his Technicolor dream coat. Yep. We've heard that story many times. We know that his brothers hated him as a result. They were jealous. Here it says that they couldn't even speak peaceably unto him. So Joseph comes around. They can't even say, "Hey, Joseph, they couldn't just be nice. They just be mad at him, like,
Yeah.
oh, there's Joseph again. Raise their fist at him and hate on him. Well, this is, says Joseph dreamed a dream, and he told his dream to his brethren, and he hated him yet the more. These dreams were prophetic dreams that indicated that Joseph was going to rise above his brethren and all that stuff. For people who hated Joseph to begin with, this wasn't the type of message that they wanted to hear.
No, of course not.
I hate this kid. Our dad loves him the best.
Mm-hmm.
Now he's coming around telling us that he's going to be better than us, when we're all grown.
Mm-hmm.
They hated him even more. And so they all made the decision to get rid of him.
Yeah.
It's kind of a two-part plan. We're going to, first they're like, let's kill him. And some of the brothers disagreed on that. They decided, okay, we're not going to kill him. We're going to sell him. We're going to get rid of him. We're going to sell him. They ended up selling him off to the Midianites. And they took that coat of many colors and they ripped it up and they rubbed goat's blood into it and stuff. And they took it back to Dad and said, hey, bummer, looks like Joseph got killed. Here's his coat, and so for decades, Jacob was under the impression that his most loved son had been killed by some wild animal a long time ago, and never knew what really happened until years later. Well, during those years, we remember this from all of our Sunday school stories. He was eventually sold into slavery in Egypt. He served for a time in this guy named Potiphar in his house. Mm-hmm. Potiphar was one of the rulers underneath the Pharaoh, and he was falsely accused of trying to proposition Potiphar's wife, and was thrown into prison as a result. While he was in prison, there were two people there who really liked Joseph, and Joseph helped both of them out and asked and requested of both of them, like, hey, when you get out, tell someone I'm innocent so I can get out of here. Well, the first one never did that, forgot about Joseph. The second one never did that, forgot about Joseph, until Pharaoh had this really weird set of dreams. And one of the prisoners remembered, oh yeah, that's right, there was this guy in prison who knows how to interpret dreams, so he could probably do this. And it was at that point that he finally remembered to mention Joseph's name. And so Joseph is brought before the Pharaoh. Years have passed, by the way.
Yeah.
From the time that Joseph was living with his family in Canaan to the time that he's brought before Pharaoh, years have passed. And it's only been bad for Joseph. Mm-hmm. He was taken from his family. He was sold to Midianites. He was sold again to the Egyptians. He was a slave in this guy's house. He was falsely accused. He was thrown into prison. He was forgotten about multiple times. And here he is standing in front of Pharaoh. It's like, well, you have 30 minutes to give a speech about something you've not prepared for, right?
Right.
And so Pharaoh explains the dream, and Joseph interprets it, and the meaning of that set of dreams ended up being one of the most important things in the entire history of Egypt, and really in the entire history of that area of the world. It was the prophecy of coming 14 years, the first set of 7 years that was going to be all plenty, really good harvest, really good food, all this stuff. They were going to have an abundance of that stuff. And then after that was going to be 7 years of famine, and it was going to be a devastating famine that was going to extend beyond the bounds of Egypt into the entire area of this biblical history. And so because Joseph had advanced knowledge of this, and now because Pharaoh had advanced knowledge of this, Pharaoh ended up putting Joseph second in command of all of Egypt. Changes his name to from Joseph to gives him an Egyptian name, Zaphnath Paneah. Right, and he becomes second in command only to Pharaoh. So the only guy above it. So he went from lowest of the low to highest of the high.
Not a bad gig.
Not a bad gig at all. In fact, he is given this position. He's given a wife. He starts having his own family. He's in a very, very significant position of power, because during these 7 years, he's able to manage Egypt's ability to store extra and prepare for those 7 years, and even go beyond preparation just for themselves, but to have excess in that preparation, and that becomes important in the next 7 years, because remember, the rest of the world didn't have this advanced knowledge.
Right, yeah.
So they're just getting hit by a famine all of a sudden, and they don't have the ability to compensate or adjust or adapt to that unplanned event. And so what people end up doing, not just in Egypt, but in the countries surrounding Egypt, is word starts to spread, hey, there's food in Egypt. So let's go there and see if we can buy food. Well, that only happens so long until you run out of money. And then what do you do then? Well, you're going to die if you don't have food. So we have to start reprioritizing what we find valuable. If we want to survive, maybe we value our lives more than we value our land or our house or our goods or our wealth, things like that. Because the priority is just, we need to survive. And so not just the people in Egypt, but the people all around Egypt start coming there, and they have to appeal to Joseph. And Egypt accumulates a ton of wealth. Their kingdom grows during this 7 years of famine, because of their preparation. They're able to leverage that and acquire a tremendous amount of wealth and land and power as a result of this. And so Egypt comes out of that 7 years really on top.
Yeah.
It's a huge and powerful kingdom, and a very wealthy kingdom at this time. And that was all orchestrated primarily by Joseph. And he reminds people of this, like, hey, Pharaoh, I acquired all this for you. This is the reason you're as big and bad as you are is mainly because the world's now your oyster, and we acquired it all because of this. And so Joseph gains power as a result. Well, think about this from Joseph's perspective. He's a little Hebrew boy, sold into Egypt. He spends most of his all of his adult life, because I think he was 17 when we first are introduced to him. He spends all of his adult life really growing up in Egypt, learning the language, the way that Egyptians write and they record documents. When he becomes a government employee, that becomes really important, because if he's organizing all this, he has to be an expert in not just Egyptian law and mythology, but the way that Egyptians write and record their records and the way their government works, all this stuff. So Joseph is a highly educated executive at this point. And by the time his family gets reintroduced to him, he's totally unrecognizable. For all they know, this is an Egyptian guy that has no clue who they are. And so they appeal to this random Egyptian guy, and he immediately recognizes them. And we know the rest of that, how he orchestrates the details around getting his family into Egypt, into an environment where they're safe, they have a home, they're provided for. And that's the entrance to that 430 years that Israel stays in Egypt. Now, at some point after Joseph dies, the Bible says that there was a Pharaoh that came about that knew not Joseph. And we're given additional details, I believe, in the book of Isaiah, because you think, well, how would a Pharaoh not know who Joseph is? I mean, he was the guy. He was the guy. We're given details in Isaiah that it was an Assyrian Pharaoh. Egypt was constantly going to war with people, and the different dynasties of pharaohs kept changing, and there was an Assyrian Pharaoh that didn't know who Joseph was, and didn't care that he was important or his family was important or whatever. And that's when you start seeing this fledgling nation, really just a large family who starts to grow into a nation. That's when they start getting treated poorly, eventually into slavery. So we sort of know that history, but the timeline that we're looking at, we're going to fast forward all the way to Mount Sinai. So Israel has been delivered out of Egypt. God just spent 10 plagues showing the world and showing Israel that he's bigger and badder than the biggest gods that the Egyptian religion worships. He's greater than that, and he's fighting on behalf of Israel. So here Israel is at the base of Mount Sinai, not just building a golden calf, saying that these are the gods that deliver us from Egypt, but they're being introduced once again, almost face to face, to this God who they've already somewhat forgotten, and this God is descending on the top of Mount Sinai and reminding them, I'm the one that brought you out of Egypt. I'm the one that's giving you the laws to as a guideline for how to live as an ethical nation, how to be a successful nation. This standard of perfection that we then learn about throughout the New Testament was impossible to keep, which was why we needed Christ. But God was giving them all that at Sinai, and this nation that was standing at the base of that mountain was a very peculiar nation because they were just leaving the place where they were 4 centuries earlier, and this nation was bringing with them a tremendous amount of wealth, a tremendous amount of weapons, a tremendous amount of history with them. The wealth that they brought with them when Egypt was going through those 10 plagues, finally Egypt had enough, Pharaoh had enough, and said, okay, you can leave. I'm going to let you leave. It was after the death of the firstborn. And the Bible even says that God gave Israel favor in the eyes of the Egyptians, and the Egyptians gave them all kinds of wealth on their way out. Like, here, just take this, take this, take this. Israel left with a ton of wealth that they didn't really spoil from Egypt. Egypt just gave it to them. Where did that wealth come from? That wealth came from, a large part, from those 7 years where the nation of Egypt, the empire of Egypt, was acquiring the wealth of the world around it because it had advanced knowledge of that famine. Yeah. When this group of people that left Egypt, they were slaves. They weren't. It wasn't a nation that had an active military or an active, means of governing themselves or whatever. But on the other side of the Red Sea, as Egyptian soldiers started washing up onto the shore, all of those weapons ended up becoming the armory of Israel. All of those weapons that were developed by the Egyptians, and so you see this little nation leaving Egypt and immediately being equipped as a military power, a nation with tremendous wealth, and it was all made possible because centuries ago this one little kid got sold into slavery in Egypt and rose to power in Egypt. But even more than that, Joseph, he's a critical character in the Old Testament because he's really he's a type of Christ. And what we mean by that, when we think about the term prophecy, we think of it in terms of the New Testament, where we're told this is going to happen, and then that happens. Well, in the Old Testament, prophecy is a little bit different. Prophecy is acted out in the form of symbols or similitudes or living metaphors, and Joseph was an example of that. So when you compare some of the details, Acts 7, Stephen gave Israel a little bit of history of their own people, and pointed out the characteristic that they never accept people the first time. Accept God's messengers the first time, and he gave an example of Joseph, like, you know, the brothers. Joseph was an important guy, and they didn't like him the first time. They kicked him out. It wasn't until the second time that they met him that they accepted him. He's saying, don't make the same mistake with Christ. When the brothers were trying to figure out what to do with Joseph, it was Judah's idea to sell him. In the New Testament, when the Pharisees were trying to figure out what to do with Christ, it was Judas that sold Christ to them. When Joseph was having his dreams, and when Israel was blessing him, it was foretold that Joseph would reign above his brethren. Same way with Christ. Jesus' future reign is foretold as well. When you look at the symbolism of Egypt, Egypt is often compared in Scripture with the secular world. Joseph comes as a servant, but he ascends to the throne. That's the same pattern that Jesus does. As he comes into the world, he comes as a servant, but he eventually ascends to the throne, ruling the world. Joseph was tempted, but he didn't sin, just like Christ. Mm-hmm. He was falsely accused and punished, just like Christ. He was numbered with two transgressors. So if you remember, Christ was on the cross. Mm-hmm. There were two thieves, or two criminals on either side of him, and Joseph was the same way. He was imprisoned with two prisoners as well. Jesus, he acquires a Gentile bride, the church. Mm-hmm. Joseph had a Gentile bride. Mm-hmm. So all of these things, when you look at them, both the factual parts of them that happened historically, but also the symbolic parts, Joseph was such an important character. But then finally, I think one of the most compelling really comes from recent archecological evidence. So.
Josh, real quick,
go ahead.
Whenever you said he was tempted but didn't sin, he did sin, but in that process he didn't sin. Whenever he was presented with an opportunity to be with a woman. He didn't sin.
That's a good point of clarification. Yeah. So Joseph wasn't divine in the aspect that he never did sin, but he's one of very, very few people about which the Bible says nothing negative about. And there was a point where he went through a period of temptation with Potiphar's wife, and he refused to sin, just like Christ. He went through a period of temptation, and refused to sin. So good clarification. Mm-hmm. So one of the criticisms, or not really criticisms, but one of the accusations about Scripture is it was not possible for Moses to have written the first 5 books of the Bible because a written Hebrew language didn't exist yet. And I think it's called the documentary hypothesis. Well, Joseph ends up becoming a really key figure in that controversy as well, because Hebrew is a very ancient language, and the Hebrew alphabet is really advanced in the arena of ancient alphabets, because it was phonetic, and that word phonetic comes from the word Phoenician, because for the longest time it was considered that the Phoenicians were the ones to develop a phonetic alphabet, an alphabet that's made of symbols that represent sounds instead of pictures that represent whole words. So a comparison would be, Egypt at the time of Joseph, they wrote in hieroglyphs. So every word has its own unique symbol. And then putting ideas together is putting together symbols of words that together make an idea. A phonetic alphabet is different. You don't have symbols that represent words. You have symbols that represent sounds.
Okay.
So if you, it's an extremely efficient way of communicating, because if every word has a picture, then that means, so how many words are in the English language? Thousands and thousands. You would have thousands of symbols that you would have to memorize. Whereas if you have only 26 letters, those 26 letters can be arranged in any number of ways to make sounds of words.
Okay.
So it's much easier to teach, it's much easier to learn, and it's much easier to last if it's a phonetic alphabet.
Okay.
And so for a long time, it was thought that the Phoenicians had the first alphabet, Phoenicia being one of those nations that were in the land of Canaan. Well, more recent archaeological evidence has shown that in the area of Egypt, the area where Israel would have encamped or would have been living, there's inscriptions that look a little bit like Egyptian, but changed slightly. It was almost like there was some key symbols of Egyptian hieroglyphs that were extracted, modified a little bit, and made into a much shorter list of phonetic symbols. Okay. And it was found in evidence and inscriptions of this were, I think, first found in the Sinai Peninsula. So it was called Proto-Sinaitic. So because it was found in the Sinai Peninsula. And this was a phonetic alphabet that predated the Phoenician alphabet. And another thing that was really weird about it that archaeologists found is there was a lot of it was kind of like in between two known written languages. It looked a lot like hieroglyphics, but it had been changed a little bit, and it kind of looked like a predecessor of what eventually became Hebrew. Okay. And so this Proto-Sinaitic became sort of an anomaly at the time, and so, but then it disappeared in Egypt. And it reappeared in Canaan, in the ancient land of Canaan, and it was still modified just a little bit, but it was obviously an extension of what had originally been developed in Egypt. It became called Proto-Canaanite. Well, Proto-Canaanite, its successor ended up becoming what we always knew of as the Phoenician alphabet. Okay. So the Phoenician alphabet wasn't really the first phonetic alphabet. It was actually Proto-Sinaitica. And this alphabet looks a lot like the original Hebrew. So when you think about that, superimpose that narrative on top of this, on top of Scripture, who would have had the knowledge of Egyptian, of the Egyptian style of writing, B, have a reason to develop it into something that was easier to learn, teach, and transmit for the purpose of his people, and C, would have had the means to do all that stuff. That's Joseph.
It's Joseph, right?
Right? Because
sure.
It would have been Joseph, and then a couple generations later, it would have been Moses. Because remember, Moses was educated in the Egyptian, under the Pharaoh. So he would have known Egyptian hieroglyphics, but also he was called to lead his people. So I sort of reading between the lines, I kind of see this as Joseph beginning this work and Moses completing this work, so that by the time Israel leaves Egypt and gets to Sinai, there's already a written language in place. It's a phonetic alphabet, so it's easy for Israel to teach to their children. It's easy for them to learn. It's easy for them to incorporate into their ability to document what God says, all that stuff. And by the time Israel's out Mount Sinai, that system of recording that system of preserving ideas in text has already been put in place, due in large part because of Joseph. So, like I said, not just important in the history of Israel, but in the history of the entire world.
Yeah.
Joseph was a key guy.
How about that? Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of history that it was easy to follow for the most part.
Sorry.
I imagine there's other things too that you could pick out of there that he was influential.
Yeah,
over.
Joseph. There's so much stuff about Joseph that we'll probably be talking about in a couple podcast episodes as we move forward. But that's sort of like a teaser of just some of the stuff. Yeah.
I wonder if it had anything to do with Phoenician blinds, because those are pretty popular too.
Could be, yeah.
That's what I'm thinking. Even today, Phoenician blinds.
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Josh, thanks, man. You got to get going. You got to get some engineering stuff.
I do.
You got to
Yeah.
go do. And Chris has got to go put water in his car, so he can get to wherever he needs to go.
And you gotta go start your ride home for him today.
I guess I have pickleball at the end of the day at 6:30. I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but anyway. All right, guys. Thanks. We appreciate it. Chris, thanks for being here.
Yep.
And Josh, thank you very much. And here we go. We'll see y'all next week.